I hear you. That's great and all. But what if Europe was flipped upside down? Over the past couple of years of playing FM, I've slowly become more and more obsessed with the UEFA coefficient system. And I know what you're thinking, Matt. Get to the back of the queue. Join the club. Your problems have never been more relatable. For those out of the loop, this is the system which decides how many European qualification places each nation gets and to which tournament those teams are assigned within that. On stream, we've been trying to grow leagues like Norway, Ireland, and now Hungary with reasonable success. We haven't got to number 1 yet, but it will happen. We don't talk about that. I stream Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, so drop a follow and I'll see you over there. But all of this got us to thinking, what would happen in the world of FM if one day all the tiny numbered dots rolled out of their tiny numbered dot beds and found that Europe had been turned upside down? Today, we find out. So what do I mean by upside down? You can now see that the worst ranked leagues in Europe are now ranked as the highest. This was based off of the coefficients at the very start of the game. This, of course, means that the big boys of Europe will find themselves down towards, as you can see, the very bottom of the list. You might expect England to be bottom. I'll explain why that is in a second, you'll see. The way I have achieved this is by editing the coefficient scores of the individual nations in the pre-game editor over the last 5 years. The original plan was going to be to simply take the top nation's coefficient score and swap it with the bottom nation and then work my way through the list up it like that. However, this presented a slight problem in that the first season of a save, the teams that have qualified for Europe are sort of hard-coded in the pre-game editor. It ignores the coefficient scores that you set and it just puts the teams in there as they are in real life. Thus, our adventure begins in season 2. They can be changed manually. It's quite time-consuming, but it can be done. However, I saw an opportunity for chaos. And when I see a chance for chaos, I take it. There are 54 nations with teams qualifying across the different European competitions, but the maximum amount of coefficient points you can assign for a nation is only 50. So the way I handle that is we flip the list over and assign San Marino, the worst team from that, 50 coefficient points, Andorra 49, and working through the list like so, until you reach the bottom of the list where all of the best sides in Europe were all assigned 0, just to make them firmly be stuck to the bottom. This also helps to offset any gains that those nations might make in the very first season of the save where things are completely normal. The individual club coefficients within the nations have not been touched for 2 reasons. One, it would be an immensely Herculean task to do something like that. But the second reason is that if I did that, it wouldn't actually make that much difference, as all the top clubs would then become pot 4 sides in draws, and all the worst clubs would become pot 1 sides in draws. So all it really does is swap the arbitrary pot number that a club is put into, and the group strength wouldn't actually change that much. They'd just be from different pots, as far as I can work out. For this test, I've also made playable as many of the top flight leagues in Europe as I physically could. Where there were some gaps, I used some of Timo's excellent extended databases to plug them, leaving us with 49 out of the 54 leagues playable, which is as good as we're going to get at this stage. You will also find in the description a download link for this version of the database, which you can install and play with yourself. It does play nicely with other databases too in all the tests that I've done. So download it, drop it in Sports Interactive, Football Manager 2023, editor data, and you're good to go. So what do I actually expect to happen with this? I'm curious to know your thoughts on that as well. I suspect that the biggest leagues will return to the top extremely quickly. This is because with less teams being in Europe from those nations, only the strongest teams will be there. But in addition, the points that they gain will be less diluted by having smaller sides in Europe with them, and thus they'll be able to gain coefficient scores that we've probably never seen before. And this is why I believe that the very, very low quality nations such as Andorra and San Marino will sink extremely quickly, because they do not have the quality, even when they're thrust into it, to make anything happen. The real winners for me could be the nations that are really far down but do still have some decent clubs and players associated with them. They could potentially clean up in the early years of this and enable themselves to establish a coefficient point base to stop them from falling too far down the table. We'll be checking in every year for the first 5 seasons, as that's when the edited points will still be active, and then after that we'll have a look at the 10 and 15 year outlooks. I couldn't sim any more than that. With this many leagues turned on, I could feel steam coming out of my PC. Let the chaos begin! Final itself, Manchester City versus Inter, doesn't seem particularly surprising, and I'm honestly not surprised, because I suspected that some of the biggest sides would be able to work their way through from the very early rounds of qualification. But I think as we start to roll the curtains back a little bit, we're going to start to see some surprises. Yeah, so this is where things take a bit of a turn. Firstly, I'm really enjoying the fact that Inter only narrowly beat KA of Iceland by 2-1 in the Champions League quarter-final. Meanwhile, Manchester City shipped 7 past Skendia of North Macedonia. It's happening. Round of 16, things have got even madder as an Andorran side how have they done that? I want to see what those groups look like. So yeah, as you can see, lots of North Macedonian sides in there. There's 3 Icelandic sides through to that round as well. Montenegrin side in there as well. So City obviously got out of their group relatively comfortably, but did drag KA with them. Scoopy got out of their group, Skendia and Starnen. So you end up with some quite weak groups in there too. Hibernians of Malta got out of their group with Arsenal in as well. So where on earth was this Andorran side getting out of their group? Oh, wow. They ended up in a group with PSG, Lincoln Red Imps, and Gap Connors Key. Imagine turning on the TV one day and seeing the Champions League draw and it's just this. Is someone cooking toast or am I just having a stroke? Thought you might also enjoy the second preliminary round here of Inter versus Bayern Munich, played in Gibraltar, because reasons. But I suspect again, when we peel the curtain back, it gets a bit madder. Actually, it's fairly straightforward. I suspect that you're going to see more madness in the Champions League initially, as a lot of the better sides will end up in the Europa Conference League, actually. So you'll see your Barcelona, Real Madrid all in there, I suspect. Although there was an Irish side here, Derry City, along with an Estonian side and a Georgian side in the quarterfinals of the Europa League at least. And those group stages are still pretty mad, especially with Shamrock Rovers winning 6 for 6 in their group. So big up the Irish, it would seem. And also big up Linfield of Northern Ireland getting out of their group as well. It does seem that there is an element of randomness to this, where you do seem to see some quite strong groups, like with PSV and Mulder in that group, but then at the same time you end up with groups like this. There you go. Conference League was won by Barcelona over Liverpool. It's basically just reversed these entirely, hasn't it? Let me guess. There was Manchester United. No, that wouldn't make any sense at all, would it? Bayern and Tottenham in the semi-finals there. Yeah, they've just flipped entirely. So you can see that, as we expected, the likes of England, Germany, Spain, Italy, these general sides have performed extremely well over the course of that season as a result of having less teams to actually play with. However, you'll also notice that in amongst that, the likes of Georgia and Iceland and Montenegro have performed extremely well themselves. And this is exactly what I was on about. You'll notice how the likes of San Marino massively down here and will start to fall, but Andorra, doing slightly better than I thought they would. It's these nations in this little clump that I'm extremely excited to see if they can hang on for a little while and whether they're still competitive 10 to 15 years down the line. Meanwhile, down at the very bottom, you'll notice that, actually Germany still sit 50th in the coefficients along with France. England have been the biggest movers up to 35th, but that's still not going to make much difference for them for next season, as you'll see that it still only gives them 4 places in Europe and 1 team in the Champions League, which will probably be City, and they'll probably win it. It's worth noting that in every season that I'm moving to, we're actually technically looking at the previous season because of when the save point is. It's a little bit annoying, but you can sort of work out when we're actually looking at. Another title for Manchester City. They're going to win a lot of these, actually beating Bayern in Munich, but is there still surprises in the latter stages of the tournament? Benfica getting there is fairly solid. It's the quarterfinals where we started seeing weirdness last time, and the weirdness has continued as Dinamo Batumi of Georgia, again with the Georgian sides doing well, and also FC Copenhagen knocking a good way through there. How the hell did Dinamo Batumi they drew with Real Madrid at the Bernabeu? Now obviously this is when the league phase moves over to be a little bit different, but incredibly you'll see Dinamo Batumi still came 8th even in the league phase that featured some pretty strong sides, including Red Bull Salzburg and Benfica. Let us venture to the Europa League, which was won by Milan against PSV Eindhoven. I wasn't expecting to see any surprise winners just because of the weaknesses in a lot of parts of the tournament, but I would like to see a semi-finalist that you don't expect potentially. Though apparently we're not getting that in the Europa League. And Atletico win the Conference League over RB Leipzig, with Chelsea and Liverpool in there too. So over the course of that year, once again, the big sides have dominated and will no doubt be moving their way much further up the coefficient charts, as you can see. However, yet again, the likes of Iceland, and in this case North Macedonia, have been sticking around quite nicely, and as a result, Iceland and Montenegro find themselves comfortably clear at the top of the coefficient charts, and I suspect that North Macedonia, within the next couple of years, might find themselves sneaking into the top 4 as well. San Marino fall out of the top 4 as Georgia now move up into it, which is not a huge surprise. I think we'll be saying goodbye to Andorra and San Marino very soon. As you'll notice, England have hidden themselves in amongst the Faroese and Northern Irish flanks, but they're pretty much on the rise, and I suspect they might take over top spot by as soon as next season at this rate. Down at the very bottom, you once again notice that Serbia and Austria as well have remained down in 52nd on this, with Norway slumping down as far as 50th, with completely ruined football infrastructure. And if that's not what you're here for, I don't know what is. It appears that what I've accidentally done here is just create a Manchester City win the Champions League every season simulator. So Pep, if you need some tips, apparently I'm your man. All you've got to do is build your own alternate universe. I'm sure you can get the instructions off the internet. It's simple. We're going to see less surprises here though, I feel like. Benfica and Inter. It's the first season where we haven't really had a huge shock in the quarterfinals. Maybe Club Brugge, but not really. Aha! The Georgians are still fighting hard here. Where's Dinamo Batumi though? There they are. And Derry City also doing a very solid job of it as well. But Georgia having 3 sides in the knockouts of the Champions League. I wasn't expecting the Georgian Revolution. I really wasn't. I had my money on being someone like Iceland or Montenegro. So in the league phase, fairly straightforward sort of stuff as PSG inexplicably miss out on the... Who do they lose to? Real Madrid, Bayern, well, they got an unlucky draw in there, didn't they? But once again, the Georgian sides all doing a relatively stable job of things. I genuinely wonder how long they can hang on to this. So you can see that, for example, Dinamo Batumi are worth £80 million and are employing people on £22,000 a week. It's a bit extreme, I'll admit, but hey, you got to go where the money is, right, Velko? Europa League was won by Red Bull Salzburg, and still the Georgians keep on fighting. Mirani getting quite deep here as well. I feel like Georgia are going to have a lot of points after this. Conference League, Barcelona win it again, but it really is just like an ersatz sort of... It's very Europa League-y in many ways, although with Barcelona... Actually, it's very Europa League-y in many ways. So over the course of that last season, yet again, England, Spain, Italy, and Germany doing their business, but again, Georgia hanging on in there, and still were like the 6th or 7th best over the course of that year with a 15-point season. Unfortunately, it's not enough as England, Germany, Spain, and Italy within 4 years move back into those top spots. However, Iceland and Georgia still firmly in there with Montenegro. You'll notice that Andorra have slipped all the way down to 14th and San Marino just disappearing off the charts now entirely. But it's still interesting to see that Iceland and Georgia have maintained that kind of record and still look entirely competent. I never thought I'd have such a love and rooting for Georgian football, but here we go. And big shout out Iceland too, who are still technically above them as well, and might be partly due to that extra bonus at the start, but I think these two are the big surprise packages, along with Montenegro. Also worth noting that Norway and Sweden still sitting in the bottom 4, along with Serbia and Cyprus down there as well. It's with fantastic news that I bring you that someone other than Man City has won the Champions League. It's Bayern 0-0 on penalties, but I think the world is healing slightly. Champions League is looking a lot more orthodox these days. Until you go to the round of 16, where once again, Iceland and Georgia doing their level best to keep plugging away there and continually qualifying for the knockouts of the Champions League. 3 Icelandic sides, 2 Georgians in there as well, an Albanian and a Montenegrin side. They all lost, admittedly, but they're still there. In fact, not only that, but Tirana only missed out on qualifying for the other round by a single point. They got a draw with Porto. Europa League final, Real Madrid and Benfica. In fairness, the Europa League has never really been super interesting in this, except for the 2 Faroese sides in the round of 16, apparently. Don't mind Derry City, that's just them taking a draw against Real Madrid. Lyon win the Conference League. Spurs in there again. They really don't ever seem to get past the semis, do they? So once again, for the year, things are fairly straightforward, but again, Georgia in there, along with Iceland and Austria finally starting to move themselves up too, but it's the same story. These guys just seem to be sticking around. Next year, they have fallen slightly down to 10th and 11th respectively, but they've done a lot better than I was expecting. As you'll now note that the likes of, well, Andorra down here in 37th, San Marino are down in 44th. Norway are finally starting to move off the bottom a little bit. But without those guaranteed places, I suspect that the golden age of Georgian football might well be coming to an end. But I still wonder if they're still going to be like a top 20 nation potentially 5 and 10 years down the line, or whether it has just gone back to complete boredom. But I'd hope not. I'd hope there's some weird stuff in there. So let's just jump 5 years and see what we can find. Oh, Manchester City are back again, friends. What I really want to see when I roll over to that round of 16 part is just see like one Georgian or an Icelandic side in there. I think this might be the first year of disappointment. Oh, it hurts me to my core, especially seeing 5 English sides in there. Good God. I am filled with sadness. Where have my Georgian friends gone? And their Icelandic brethren lost to the waves. Spurs lose the final to Bayer Leverkusen. The Derry City, though, still in the Europa League knockout, so fair play. I guess that's what a lot of difference 5 years can make, as you see Dinamo Batumi all the way down here now, bottom of the Europa League nearly. It's enough to bring a tear to your eye. And Dundalk also doing quite well for Ireland. Stjarnan, I mean, they're out, but they did a thing. So the coefficient places are starting to look awfully like they normally would do. Even Norway have actually moved their way all the way back up again with some relatively solid seasons, and our friends are nowhere to be seen. Irish, though, still sitting in 23rd, so that's pretty impressive. Hungary have moved up quite a decent amount as well. But North Macedonia down in 31st now. Georgia 35th. Where's Iceland gone? Oh, they're actually only 24th. I'm actually surprised at how quickly it sorted itself out again, but it does seem that the biggest impacts of things have been around about the middle of the road, with the likes of Montenegro and Iceland, especially Iceland, still in 24th place after 10 years now. But it does appear that they are starting to slowly slide back down again, and we'll probably see them back down here again when we go to our final stop in only 4 years, actually, because I forgot how many years I simmed. So, to our final simming point. Go on, Iceland, please stay top 30. I beg of you. Most recent league phases in the Champions League are fairly straightforward, although Angers being in there in 8th spot is surprisingly slightly, but it's mostly the same sort of teams that you would expect. Europa League seems to be a little bit of a similar story, though there are still some Icelandic sides kicking about in the Europa League, which is something, I suppose, even though if they are getting absolutely tonked every single week, but still not a great deal of changes in there, really, although that was a hell of a... What on earth is going on here? Chelsea... St. Pauli? I mean, that's going to have to be looked at. What is going on here? So St. Pauli got good. massively good, apparently, with Fernando Torres as their manager. Interesting, the likes of Flora Tallinn here still achieving reasonable success in the Conference League, surprisingly. That gives me hope that Ireland might have actually maintained themselves a little bit. All right, let's look at these coefficients, because I am about to be super disappointed, I think. To England still remain top. Wow, that's just exactly what you'd expect, isn't it? Any real shocks as we work our way down here? Norway back up to where they were. Hungary up to 18th is actually... Have Ireland gone up since 5 years ago? I think they have, you know. Weren't they like 20? That's genuinely surprised me. Bear in mind, Ireland start like 40th or something, or very late high 30s and actually fall down at the start of a save, I think. They've actually done all right and maintained themselves quite well in this period. Where have Iceland gone? Faroe Islands at 31st isn't too bad. Georgia stay 32nd. It's not good, I'll be honest, but it could be a lot worse. Ireland are the ones that have really stood out to me there. Hungary start a bit further down too, but that, being 20th place out of all this, is surprising. Northern Ireland in there as well. I'm just waiting for someone like random, like Portugal. I'm like, what? But no, I don't think we're going to get Portugal down here somewhere. Although it does look as though it's sort of fallen back to where you'd essentially expect things to be. So much so that San Marino have literally got nil points. Points? What are they? We don't do points around these parts. I'm still sad that Georgia couldn't hang on to it, though. Kind of a fascinating one here that Genk sold a player called this guy, Zabukovnik, from them to Flora Tallinn for 4 million quid. Which presumably was at that period when Tallinn was still like a decent side in this save. I mean, they've still got players here on 10 grand a week. I think what this has almost certainly done is break the wage structure of every single club and league in the entire game. I figured we'd see something like this eventually. So yeah, Dinamo Batumi spent 6 million quid on Mikko Kivimäki, and they're still spending it now. They have a player on 46 grand a week. Here's one for you. KF Skendia spent 10.5 million on a player from QPR in the Premier League. There's still guys earning over 10k a week in Andorra, despite the fact that the clubs they must be hemorrhaging money. Yet most of the wage bills in most nations have returned to normal, except in Georgia, where they are still spending moon money on players. The fact that Dinamo Batumi have got 3 guys on over 30 grand a week is bizarre, and would explain why they're in such an enormous amount of debt. In fact, they're spending 100k a week more than they should be. How are they not in administration by now? It seems that they gave a lot of these players enormous wages, probably with yearly wage rise clauses in them as well, back when things were going good, and now they're in deep trouble and can't shift them. Disappointed to see Iceland and Georgia fall off so heavily, given how well they actually started this. Now, potentially that might have just been because they were the best sides of a bad group, but they were still hanging on in there quite towards the end and staying in with the big boys. So like the video, subscribe if you're new, and happy upside downing, I guess. See you soon.